Thank you for taking time out with PSOA. Sean Johnston here from Omaha, Nebraska, bringing you PSOA rules topic, traveling. We are going to take a look at some plays and then focus on terminology and then end the training tape on tips. So let's take a look at the traveling basics before we have you make the call on the 4 plays we're going to cover today. Number 1, dribbler cannot lift the pivot foot prior to the start of the dribble. Number 2, the shooter can lift the pivot foot but cannot bring the pivot foot down prior to the release of the pass. Number 3, passer can lift the pivot foot but cannot bring the pivot foot down prior to the release of the shot. And number 4, the pivot foot is established when a pass is caught or a dribble ends. So as we take a look at the 4 plays, keep in mind of these traveling basics. Hopefully you're watching this at home where you can pull out a piece of paper and write down play 1, play 2, play 3, play 4. And as you watch these plays, you write down, you make the call before we go into the terminology of travel. So here is play number 1. Does the start of that dribble, was that a travel or was that a legal play? We're going to slow it down here in slow motion. You make the call. Travel or no travel? And then we're going to go to play number 2. On this spin move, travel or no travel? Let's replay it in slow motion. Legal play or travel? You make the call. And now play number 3. Post play. Is this a travel or is this a legal play? Let's slow it down to slow motion. Once again, you make the call. Legal play or travel? And now on to play 4, which will be our last play. You make the call. Travel on number 25 or legal play? Let's slow it down. Once again, you make the call. Travel or no travel? So now that you had an opportunity to take a look at 4 potential travel, no travel plays, now let's take a look at the terminology, which is going to be the most important part when it comes to the judgment when explaining to players and coaches why it was or why it was not a travel. Coaches have asked for consistency throughout the season. And the only way we could have consistency is through the proper terminology when explaining judgment calls. So terminology, a dribble begins when the ball has been intentionally batted or pushed to the ground once or several times. Right? Intentionally is very important word. Then the dribble ends when the dribbler catches or causes the ball to come to rest in the hand or hands, or when an opponent touches the ball and the ball is loose. That is what we would call an interrupted dribble. So what can the players do when they catch the ball? When they catch it with both feet on the floor, either foot can be the pivot foot, left foot or right foot. Whichever foot they move first, that is the non-pivot foot. The foot that remains stationary becomes the pivot foot. If they catch the ball with one foot on the floor, the foot on the floor or ground must be the pivot foot. So when they catch it with one foot touching the ground, tap your left leg if that's the pivot foot, or tap your right leg if that's the pivot foot. That helps you remember this. After a dribble with one foot on the floor, that foot can be the pivot, or the player can jump and land on both feet and have no pivot. Next option, when a dribble is ended with both feet on the floor, either foot can be the pivot foot. And at the end of the dribble, with no feet on the floor, they are in the air. They land on both feet. Either foot can be the pivot, or the first foot down is the pivot, and a jump can be made landing on both feet with no pivot. So as we process this terminology, there's a lot of different situations where no feet can be a pivot foot, one foot must be the pivot foot, or either foot can be the pivot foot. We must know the terminology to communicate it to the coaches and players. So now let's take a look at those 4 plays again and give you not only what the call is, but why the call is what it is. When this player catches the ball, both feet are on the playing court, so either foot can be the pivot foot. He steps with his right foot, so now the left foot is the pivot foot. Tap your left leg. That is the pivot foot. He could take as many steps as he wants with this right foot, but he cannot lift this left foot until the release of the ball to start the dribble. And that is tight. This is what I would call a 50-50 travel call. Whether you call it a travel or you don't call it a travel, you have to be able to explain to a coach or player why it was or why it wasn't in your judgment. In my judgment, the ball was released prior to the left foot being lifted. In my judgment, the left foot was lifted prior to the ball being released. Play number 2. He first catches the ball with the right foot as his pivot foot. And then he moves both feet. So you can call a travel right there. Both feet moved after the catch and after the right foot was the pivot foot. As this play continues, the right foot was the first foot down and the right foot moves forward. This is a travel. This is not a 50-50 travel. This is clearly the right foot was the pivot foot. It was lifted and brought back down to the ground prior to the shot. Travel. Play number 3. Post entry. Right now the right foot is the pivot foot. The right foot was lifted prior to the release of the dribble. That is a travel. Now, when the dribble is ended, the right foot is the first foot on the ground. That is his pivot foot. It is lifted and is landed, and the other foot is lifted and moved. This is a travel as well. The biggest learning point on this play, in post-play situations, the outside officials have the best look at the pivot foot. The lead official is looking at the contact. So in post-play, trail official, center official, pick up that pivot foot and help the lead official out. This was a travel. And now play number 4. Catches the pass, and his left foot is his original pivot foot. Dribble is started prior to the left foot being legal. The start of this dribble is legal. As this play continues, and number 25 drives to the basket, we now have to judge. If your judgment is the dribble has ended and he has put that ball to rest in his hand, the left foot is the pivot foot right now. If you judge the dribble has ended right here, that this is the moment the ball came to rest, the right foot is the pivot foot. So if you judge the left foot was the pivot foot, he came down on his left foot, travel. If you judge the right foot was his pivot foot, his right foot never comes down, no travel. So this goes back to a 50-50 travel call. We must have the information why you do have a travel, left foot was the pivot foot when the dribble ended, or why you do not have a travel. The right foot was the pivot foot in your judgment when the dribble ended. Now that we know what a travel is and why it is, we now have to communicate it to the audience. It's a 3-step process. Step 1, whistle with an open hand. This lets everybody know we have a violation. Step 2, signal of traveling, rolling arms chest high. Advance of your body and announce why it was a travel. Left foot lifted prior to the start of the dribble. Right foot lifted and landed prior to the release of the pass and shot. And then third, giving the resumption of play with a point. So we have a diagram here. Wherever that traveling violation took place, you want to find the nearest point with that arrow to next put it in play. Let your partners know where they are supposed to inbound the ball. Left side, right side makes a difference. Baseline, end line, sideline makes a difference. Let's be consistent and put the ball in play at the proper spot. Take it to the next level. Some case plays that have been turned in. Player dives for the basketball and slides 10 feet in possession of the basketball. What's the call? Legal play. The original body part that touched the ground while in possession remained in contact with the ground. This could even happen with feet. They gain possession of the ball and their feet slide because the floor is either dirty or slippery. That is legal because the pivot foot was not lifted. Case play 2. Player dives for the basketball, slides on their stomach for 10 feet, then rolls over with the basketball. Travel. Since their stomach was on the ground, once they roll with the basketball, their pivot foot was lifted. That is a travel. Case play number 3. Player is laying on their back with the basketball, sits up, but does not attempt to stand up. Legal play. All right. So in that case, their buttocks is the pivot foot. And so long as they don't attempt to stand up, they can remain on the floor and pass the ball. And if they have a dribble left, they could start their dribble, then stand up while dribbling. Case play number 4. Player gains possession of the basketball while falling, continues to fall to the ground in possession of the basketball. Travel. You cannot fall to the ground while in possession of the basketball. Players watching this, if you know you're in control of the ball while falling, before you hit that ground, let it go. Then you could possess it once again. That's not even considered a dribble. But you cannot fall to the ground with possession of the ball. To close out this training tape, we're going to talk about traveling tips. Every time a player catches or ends a dribble, find the pivot foot. Ball first, then feet. In pregame, watch how players are warming up. How players practice is how they will play. If you see players traveling in practice, let's preventive officiate and let them know that why they are traveling, and let's try to educate them what they could do differently so they are not called for traveling during the game. And last but not least, the lower level of basketball you go, do not measure on the minors. The higher up you go, you can't miss the travels that everybody could see. But make sure it fits the game. Do not allow the offense ever to gain a scoring advantage. And the higher up you go, do not allow the offense to gain a possession advantage. Do not measure on the minors. Get the travels that make a difference in the game, and then educate when you can. If you enjoyed this training tape, please let us know. If there's something else we could do to improve future rules topic training tapes, please let us know in the comments. We appreciate your feedback. Your feedback is what is going to make future training tapes on rule topics better for all. Thank you for taking time out today with PSOA. Officials, remember, you're only as good as your last call.